Welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Friday, June 23rd, 2023, and this is episode 762 of Living Free in Tennessee, and it's a Friday. So it's a Homestead Happenings Day. We have 2 weeks crammed into one because I was funeraling and all sorts of stuff in the last 5 days. So it's been a little bit crazy here. I'm really blessed to have a friend in town from another state who drove here to help me get things in order in my house, which ended up like looking like a bomb went off in the last 5 days. And it already kind of looked like a bomb went off because of all the construction we've been doing, right? So she came out and she's actually out sterilizing the kitchen because we have a chicken processing workshop tomorrow, and the outside kitchen's ready to go, but the inside kitchen is not. And sometimes we bring we'll do the class, and the class will process like 20 of the 47 birds that we're processing, and then the students go home with their birds, and we have the rest of the birds to process, which I thought we would do in advance, but then I've been like flying and driving and all of these things, so that didn't happen. Tonight we might do some birds. We'll see. So what usually happens is we do a second set of birds for like holler neighbors, because these are our birds for the rest of the year. So those get shared out among the neighbors, and we do the afternoon shift. And during the afternoon shift, it gets hot outside. So I have a tendency to do the processing out there, the eviscerating out there, and then if I'm going to actually parts out my birds this year. So I have bags of leg quarters and bags of other pieces all at one. I'm going to have a few whole birds. Usually I just have all whole birds, but I realized for the spring workshop, I end up quartering the birds anyway. So I might as well have quarters. And then the cool thing is when you have all leg quarters, they cook at about the same time. And when you have all breast quarters, those cook all about the same amount of time. And it just makes it easier to produce en masse when we're feeding people chicken. Plus I can do fried chicken, for example. I might do fried chicken at the workshop next year. I understand that Chef Brett has a possibly portable fryer, so we'll actually deep fry them. We'll bread them with pork rinds, except for a couple of ones without that, that we will prepare for the people who have allergies and or will not eat pork. So that's a whole fun introduction, isn't it, guys? If you are on the live stream and you have a question today, please put your first few words in all caps. I see a number of people who are here. We've got Erica, we've got Greenberry Grove, One Step Closer, Martinson family, Homestead Glamour Girl, and Faith are all here. And so talk amongst yourselves, of course. If it's in lowercase, I assume you're talking to each other in the chat. If you want my attention, first 2 to 3 words in all caps, or just put caps on and do the whole thing in all caps. And I'll do my best to work it into the show. I'm not doing a long Holler Neighbor Q&A session today after the show online, because we are getting ready to have a whole bunch of people here to process chickens. And I still need to make the chili and the pulled venison enchiladas. And that's a whole story you'll get later in the show about why it's pulled venison and not pulled pork. Today, though, I am going to talk about busy season on the homestead. We are in high season right now. Canning update, garden abundance, weeds, chicken graduation weekend, and more. Before we do that, I want to talk about our featured event of today's show, which is the October 16th Chicken Processing Workshop in Camden, Tennessee. You can get tickets for that at selfreliancefestival.com. And Joel Salatin is going to kick us off with a demonstration and talk about chickens, which is really cool. So if you want to learn chicken processing and you want to meet Joel Salatin, you can do 2 things at one time. The first 25 people who sign up will get to go home with their chicken they process. We will have teams of people processing chickens. It's going to be a good time. Camden, Tennessee, October 16th. Early bird pricing is $195 through August 1st. So get your tickets now, selfreliancefestival.com, or if you're on the YouTube, the link is in the show notes, straight to the actual product. You'll go home with my chicken processing guide, and it's going to be a really good time. We're featuring some of Featherman's products, and they make a great chicken. They make great things for processing chickens, like cones and scalders and that sort of thing. Next, I want to thank our 2 sponsors of today's show, Discount Mylar Bags.com. link is in the show notes or in the description of the video. Anyway, Discount Mylar Bags has been supportive of this podcast pretty much since we started. And they've also supported Hollow Roast, but they make quality Mylar bags. Well, they source them actually. And they pass on the savings of buying in bulk to you when you buy in less bulk, which is nice. So you can get a case of Mylar bags for putting your freeze-dried things in, putting your dehydrated things in, protecting your grains if you're a grain store, that sort of thing. And if you go to discountmylarbags.com, on the right-hand side is a bunch of articles that Toby has written about how to store food, what size bags you might want to consider, because he realized a lot of people just get the biggest Mylar bag they can get and put things in it. And in reality, if you want to use the things you're storing, it's not necessarily the best thing to open a 5-gallon bag of dehydrated peppers. So having multiple smaller bags is a better strategy. He talks about that, how to size your O2 absorbers, demystifying a lot of the things that people have a lot of opinions on. He has experience. That's over at discountmylarbags.com. Our second sponsor of today's show is a social network. If you're getting sick of getting censored on the big social networks, check out freesteading.com. It's a bunch of freedom-oriented people, a bunch of homesteaders, all in one place. They are not censoring what you say, which means if you want to sell eggs, you can post your eggs for sale there. On Facebook, if you post your eggs for sale there, you get vegan censored. Sometimes you keep your egg listing up, and other times they're like, nope, you can't sell eggs on Facebook because vegans. They have lots of rules. It's hard to sell livestock there. You can do that at freesteading.com, and you can talk about whatever you want to. If you want to talk about pagan rituals, you can talk about that. If you want to talk about your Christian faith, you can talk about that. It is an environment where we talk about things. And yesterday I was talking with my friend Oxy about spanking children. And I realized there was a time in my life where I saw spanking children as a legitimate pathway. And because I've talked to, and I don't have children, so because I've talked to other parents and talked about my opinions in an open, non-threatening way, over time, I've come to the conclusion that spanking children is a bad idea. And there are much better ways to teach children and prepare them to be adults than whacking their bottoms. And in fact, when we choose violence, that we can pass on violent tendencies to the children, then that's a bad idea. That's my opinion. The reason the opinion changed is I was able to openly talk about that. But we are in a world where openly talking about ideas and exchanging ideas and having a discussion and sharing facts and all of that is discouraged unless your opinion is a very clear-cut opinion. And it's done on the right and it's done on the left. It's not just the left, guys. And that's really unfortunate because by the open exchange of ideas, we're exposed to different ideas. We are exposed to find other research. We examine our opinions, and our opinions change over time if we are critical thinkers. You should always doubt your opinion and question it to find out what direction you should go. Freesteading.com is a place where you can have open discussions. So check them out. If you do go there, find the Living Free in Tennessee group and start talking to each other there. Our first segment today is forage. This is what's growing in the woods, basically. It's funny, when Tactical did this, he wasn't quite sure. Is it what's in the garden? Is it what's in the woods? And I have a tendency to sort of put the herbal things that are growing wild and then the things that are growing wild and then the herbal things I grow all into one bag. Like we are about to have echinacea flowers, which I will then harvest some and I will dry them. If you grow echinacea, which is purple cone flower, it is something that, like, when you feel yourself getting a cold, you make tea out of it. You can make tea out of the leaves, out of the flowers, and out of the roots. So all parts of the plants are usable. And I got echinacea started here. Like a lot of people, like Brian brought me some. And one year, Matt, the electrician from Senior Chief Electric, his wife started some and brought me this tiny little plant. And I seeded it, and I was really having bad luck getting it started. That plant from Senior Chief Electric's wife is the one that made it. And that year I got to harvest some stuff, and I had it in a pot outside. The next year it came back, and I was like, sweet. And then we did the hillside garden. So that wasn't that long ago. That was last year. I transplanted it to the hillside garden, and now I have an echinacea bush. So I finally got it established here. The lesson from that, guys, is if you really want something established on your property, keep trying. This is why I have spent hundreds of dollars on rosemary plants, because I love rosemary. And eventually we're going to have one that like is the honey badger of rosemary plants, and it lives on my property. And I just put them everywhere, and eventually some of them live. I have some alive right now. They're not doing very well, but they're alive. So we'll see how they do. They got a little shock when it got dry, and I didn't realize that they were there and needed some more water in their first year. Elderflower is blooming, but it's turning into berries. And the thing about that is if you harvest the elderflower and it's like half elderflower on a cluster of flowers and partially elderberries that are green, those have cyanide in them, and you don't want to eat them until they're ripe. You basically, you don't eat elderberries until they're ripe. You don't eat the stems, you don't eat the roots, because that can cause it can cause you to go to the hospital if you eat too much of it. Mostly what will happen is you'll have intestinal discomfort you don't want. So wait till elderberries are ripe. If you do see some flower clusters, you can totally still harvest those and cook those into fritters. But once the berries are on there, guys, bad idea, bad idea. The mullein is starting to flower. It's a 2-year cycle. So the little plants from last year are now big plants, and they're starting to put up shoots. So we'll be harvesting mullein flower, drying that for winter tea. Wild raspberries are still with us. The gooseberry bushes are ripe. Stinging nettle is ready to harvest. And we may have found a butternut tree. We're not sure. We found it because it's too soon to tell for me by looking at the nut to know if it's a butternut. But it sure looks a lot like a butternut, but it might be a buckeye. Buckeyes have like a distinctive pattern, but until the fall, I don't know for sure, because I've never seen a young buckeye. So I don't know what it is. If it's a butternut tree, we're actually going to try to propagate that. And that was over at the sheep pasture next door at my neighbor's property. Sassafras leaves are ready to harvest. And I put that in just so I could say the word sassafras a few times, because I love that word and it makes me giggle. And then we have been, by we, I mean Tactical, has been taking cuttings off the willow and comfrey and scattering them all over the holler. My poplar hybrid is ready to do the same thing too. And so there's just a lot coming off the land. We are going to be entering into goldenrod season and some other more mature sorts of wild forage for herbals. And it's just like this time of year is the time of year where you can live off the land fairly easily, right? So that is One Step Closer says many people can't have honest discussions. They might start hating each other if they did. And that's true. A lot. We've been taught that if people don't think exactly like we do, that we can't interact with them or be friends with them. And that's very different than the environment I grew up in, where we were encouraged to talk to each other about our differences and find similarities, but also challenge each other's beliefs. And that's where I want to go back to that. So I just behave that way at this time. I don't have a lot of F's to give about people who don't agree with me not wanting to hear me say my opinion. It's where it is. And I am totally open to hearing your opinion, and I'm open to discussion on that. And that just, I think it's a confidence thing. We're teaching people not to be confident about themselves and their abilities to analyze things. And you guys, you got a really big computer up here. Have confidence in it. Question it too, though, because you're going to build the world you build around you based on how that computer is analyzing things. Yeah. Erica says, my wild blackberries never get plumpy. That's true here too in Tennessee. I have some thornless blackberries that I don't know how they're doing, but I have one climbing up in my outdoor shower. That's always fun to watch. But those might get plumpy. Tennessee's not the greatest place to get decent blackberries. I'm from Oregon, and the Oregon blackberries are superior. Next segment is livestock. This is where we talk about the animals. So like all winter long, we were talking about all the struggles with the animals. And now it's like, there's a lot of work, and there's a lot of work with the animals, but chicken graduation weekend starts tomorrow, and we might do a set tonight. We'll see. Depends on how ready I am with facilities outside. When the Eversoles get off work, they were going to come over and either help finish setting up or help process the first set of, 10 birds probably would be a number I would do. And the interesting thing is we do this annual chicken processing class because every time I process chickens, there are people saying, how can I learn how to process a chicken? And the answer is, come here, take my class, and you'll go home with your guide to processing chicken. You'll go home with your chicken. I'll walk you through the whole process. I and Chef Brett will walk you through the whole process. And if you get to the point where it's time to unalive the bird, which is usually the hardest part for people, and it's not something you're willing to do, you will find out before you have 25 birds at your house that need to be unalived, which is good. And we also talk about how we raise them, the finances, where we sourced our feed, that sort of thing. And we will unalive your bird for you if you can't. I've only had to do that twice. Most people are willing to. We do set up a comfortable environment for doing that. And part of that is acknowledging that it's hard. So it's not just you that thinks it's hard. Pretty much everybody thinks that part's hard. And it does get a little easier over time as you do more birds, but it's like, you have to appreciate that this thing is giving its life so that you can flourish by having chicken dumpling stew later in the year. And when you've invested your time into raising the animals, it's no wonder that part is like gives you a moment of hesitation. I've never hunted, so I don't know if that's true when you see a deer through your scopes, but I bet it is. It's also rabbit graduation weekend. They were supposed to be graduated last weekend while I was out of town, and somehow they did not get graduated, and they are in the way of the new rabbits coming. So they're going to be graduated. This batch of rabbits is intended for canine consumption, so we're not going to do anything other than unalive them and cut them in half and have bags of hindquarters and front parts so that we can start feeding the LGDs on a raw diet. We're trying to get as many rabbits as we can ready before rabbit reproduction season is over based on the number of does that we have. And I have a lot of baby rabbits everywhere. So we very quickly went from 4 rabbits to 54 rabbits, and that's okay. We have some little cute ones, and we have 2 batches that are ready to go. So about 25 rabbits are ready to be processed. We also have somebody who asked if anybody knows how to process rabbits who is coming to our chicken processing workshop. And we're going to show that person. We're going to do a demo on how to process rabbits while we're at it, just because she's here. And we can show her or him, I actually don't remember the person's name, how to do that. And there's something about like you see all of these videos on how to do stuff or written instructions, but it's just different when you see it in person. It doesn't mean you can't figure it out if you have to figure it out that way. And please do not process your birds or your rabbits because all you have is a YouTube resource. That's better than the resource I had. I had a flippin' piece of paper with pictures, and we got it done, and we learned some stuff along the way. I just shortcut you at the class. So that's happening. The new baby rabbits are on the way. We have rabbits due, I believe, next weekend. And then our other babies are super cute and cuddleable. And I've been, petting them when I have time. I wish I had like a nearby neighbor kid who could come over and play with some of my baby animals because they like that. And it just makes the animals easier to handle if you spend a lot of time handling them, but we don't. So it's just me who's like, oh, I'm gonna pet the little bunny. And they do. Like the first time you pick up a baby bunny, it will scream if it's never been picked up, and then you like pet it, and then it calms down and you put it back, and then the next day when you pick it up, that doesn't happen. So that's just part of the handling process. The breast chickens, which are in the hollow roosts that Steve Eversole built, have been let out into the real world. And the first day we opened the door, they looked out the door at this thing and they were like, nope, rope, I'm back in. And eventually I became a whirling dervish and forced them all out the door. And then they spent the day under the hollow roost, and the ducklings too. And then when it came time to put them in bed, they had no idea. So we tried to drive them up the ramp, and pretty much what ended up happening is Steve and I picked up all the birds and threw them through the door and then closed the door. And it was a merry chase. Would have made a pretty funny video, I'm sure. So they are out. The ducklings have also been going out, and they're younger than the chickens, but they're bigger than the chickens because ducks grow super fast. And indeed, I can confirm I have all female ducklings from the eggs we hatched. So that's pretty cool. And at this point, we've been using the all ducks go to bed call and herding them into a chute that puts them on the ramp. And originally what happened is the chickens would be like, okay, time to go to bed. And they go up the ramp to where the chute stops halfway up and then jump off the sides. And some of them figured out how to go up the ramp. We are 5 days into this. And now all but 4 ducks went up the ramp yesterday, and the chickens are just putting themselves to bed. So it's taken about 5 days. I think by the end of the weekend, we will have everybody accomplished it going up and down the ramp. And then the ducklings are moving out. So the chicken tractor that we have with the meat birds in it is going to move over near the duck coop. And we're going to put the baby ducks in there and build a little makeshift yard out there and let them out during the day, and then teach them all ducks go to bed. And then there's going to be this one day where we herd them in with the other ducks. So first what happens is we will acclimate them to that home, and then we will let them free range with the other ducklings. The ducks will all intermix and get to know each other. And then there will be a magic day where they all herd into the same coop at night. And that has always worked well for me. I don't end up with ducklings picked on by the other ducks if they get to know each other out in the wild before we start putting them in the coop. I am setting up the compost area in the yard around the holler roost so that my food scraps can start being scratched through by the chickens. I'm debating whether I make a mash out of my kitchen scraps before I put them out there, or just put them out there raw. What's happening first is I'm putting them out there raw. The way I'm doing that is I'll make a little enclosed area with cinder blocks or lumber, maybe 2 feet by 4 feet. So not super big. And I will put a layer of wood chips down that I have. And then I will start putting the food in there, and the chickens come in and scratch. And it'll be a square, and the level will be below the level of the outer casing area, but low enough that they can get over. And the reason I'm doing it that way is I want to kind of keep that compost concentrated in one area, because I want it to turn into soil. So they'll eat what they want to eat, and bugs will be attracted to it, and they'll eat those. And then they toss the compost with the wood chips with their little chicken scratches, and that will eventually turn into soil I can either use down there or I can ship off somewhere else. So this will be our first compost space for the chickens. We'll see, based on the amount of food waste we create, how many of those over the year go. And of course, the feed consumption of the breast chickens has cut in about half since we started putting them out, which is really nice on the budget. And that's because they're getting the bugs in the grass that's out there. So that's super cool. We had a weird sheep story. So Tactical went up and he gives them, so the sheep just eat grass, but he gives them about a half scoop of what he calls sheep ice cream, which are Timothy pellets. They love it. And if you shake the pellets, they come running. They just absolutely love it. So he did that, and all the sheep came running and ate. And he looked around. He's like, I feel like this isn't all the sheep. And he realized that Floki and Timmy were not there. And he's like, where are the 2 boys? And he went looking for them, and he found them way up on the pasture, not coming down. And usually they're the first to come down. So he was like, they acted weird. And I'm like, do I need to look at them? Are they sick? He's like, I don't think they're sick. I looked at them. My theory on this, and eventually they came down and they ate the sheep ice cream. My theory on this is there was something really tasty up the hill that they'd gotten into, like perhaps a raspberry bramble patch. Don't know. They didn't behave that way the second day. But the thing is, when your sheep start behaving weird, you want to start looking like, is there parasites? Are they looking anemic? Because what will happen with ruminants is they will hide that they are sick. And then when they start looking sick, when they start behaving sick, you're like way down the road. And it's very hard at that point. So you want to identify those things early. And change in behavior is the first thing that you want to look at very carefully. The eggs we are getting from the duck flock, we were getting 4 a day. Now we're getting 1 a day. Although we got 1 khaki Campbell egg today. We got 1 Muscovy egg yesterday, which is cool. I'm starting to be able to tell the difference between them, which is nice for incubation purposes. Typically around July, we get low egg counts in, and this is not different than any other July. So they are either hiding them in the yard so they can set their own eggs, which the khaki Campbells do about this time of year, or they're just not laying as many. In fact, with the new ducks coming up, we need to decide if we're just going to process everybody else besides the Muscovies, and set them up for duck stew because they are not paying their feed bill now. What I've done in the past is let everybody just age out. And this year may be the year that we don't do that because finances. Don't need to be paying for winter feed for ducks that don't put out. These ducks are about 6 years old. So they're not putting out as well as they used to, right? So we'll look at that. We may go through, I think there's some ways you can assess if a duck is still laying by their physical condition. And I'm gonna YouTube the heck out of that, guys, because I've never actually analyzed my ducks for that and see if we can tell. And if we can tell, I'm probably gonna I'll skin them. I won't pluck them because birds that are that old are really hard to pluck, especially if they're ducks. Like even younger ducks, when you go to pull out the feather, the wing feathers, like, and the tail feathers, I have to use pliers to get those out, even when they've been scalded. So what'll happen there is we'll probably just skin them, and then I'll decide, is the whole carcass being used for stew, or am I just going to cut out the breasts and, sous vide the heck out of those or braise them or something. We will see. The next segment is grow. This is where we talk about what we're actually growing gardening wise. The difference between this and the forage section is this is intentional growth. It's time to harvest the fodder trees. It's been time to harvest the fodder trees for 2 weeks, and I've been not home harvesting fodder trees. So it's even more time to harvest the fodder trees. What I'm doing with the harvest from that. So I've pollarded them, which means I've cut them up high, and then they put out multiple branches. I will trim them down to where just 3 branches are left. That will become 3 places that more branches come out, bunch out. And then we will start rotating which one of those we trim back on the new ones. We also pollarded a bunch of box elder because our ruminants really like box elder leaves, and they were already here. So I don't have to wait for them to grow. And so I'm just deciding how I'm going to pollard those as well. I'm cutting them up high so that we can run the ruminants through underneath them for grass and other things. Thank you, Faith. Hit that like button, folks. And I'm doing that so that we can do that, but we still get a harvest of tree hay. And then here's what I can do with it. I can dry it and bring it out in the winter. I can feed it to them right away as a supplement, or I can make silage out of it by running it through a leaf chipper. This year, I'm just going to feed it straight to the goats. That's my plan, because there isn't enough volume, I don't think, to warrant drying it. If there is, I'll dry some. I'm probably not going to make silage this year. I do plan to try silage, so I might put some aside just to see how does the silage stuff work and see if I'm successful. When you make it into silage, you're more likely to get buy-in from your poultry on eating that as well. But this is just another way we're looking to replace the need for outside inputs on our animal feed. And Nick Ferguson sent me a bunch of these trees, and we built them into the system here. There's a whole other section of the homestead where I plan to put hybrid poplar and reduce the number of cedar trees over time. We haven't started that project yet, although Tactical probably has started it. Faith says silage confuses me. So let's talk about what silage is. What silage is when you harvest a bunch of organic matter, like cutting the tiny branches off of my pollarded trees. You grind it up and you ferment it in an anaerobic way, I believe. Let me double check that on the internet, because you put it in, let's see, silage. I believe it's anaerobic, but I could be wrong. Partial fermentation to the point of acidification. It does not say if it's anaerobic or aerobic. Here's how I've been told to do it, though. And this is something where you're going to learn while I learn. I will grind it up, put it in a bag, and seal the bag and let it ferment. And then the process of fermenting breaks down the sugars and makes them more accessible to the livestock, and it helps to keep it like good longer. And then you feed that silage to your animals. So cattle will eat it. If you just need to make sure you do the fermentation right. So cattle will eat it. and poultry will eat it. I think rabbits will probably eat it, and other ruminants will eat it. And it's a way to both preserve some nutrition for your animals, but also make more nutrition accessible from the things that you ferment. That's what I know about it. I am just starting on the process of learning about how silage works. So as I learn more, I will share it with you, but I don't want to like pretend that I'm an expert on this. I am trying it for the first time. I am on my 16th year of homesteading, and for the first time, I'm trying silage. And this is the thing. You can learn new things when you're homesteading the entire time you're homesteading, and you just have to decide to learn something. So that's one of the things I want to learn. So yeah, it's anaerobic fermentation. I just found the answer. Silage undergoes anaerobic fermentation, which starts 48 hours after the silo is filled. So it's called silage because it was put in a silo. If you look at Wartime Farm, like those series, I don't remember if it was the Wartime Farm series or another one. They actually make silage and construct a silo for it. I'm looking at doing it on a smaller scale in sealed bags to spark the anaerobic fermentation. So hopefully that answers your question. Kentucky's sustainable living is in the house. Greetings. So broccoli 2.0 harvest happened, and I harvested it and put a TikTok video out. If you want to go to Nicole Sauce on TikTok, I think it's Nicole Sauce 72 or something. No, it's Nicole Sauce LFTN, or I don't know. There's an actual Nicole Sauce account that never gets used. That was the first account I set up on TikTok that I can't get access to. Just saying. But when you grow broccoli, like you get the main head, and then you if you chop that off but leave the plant, it'll put out little side heads. And I got those, and I've never kept broccoli alive long enough to get the side heads in Tennessee. So they came out white. It was really interesting. And then they turned to green. And I harvested them yesterday. I got them in, and I was like, I bet I could have left those a little longer, but I was so excited to have little broccoli heads. So we had some last night in a saute. We'll have more. And I left the plants there in case it wants to put out more side broccoli shoots. We'll let it go as long as it can. I'm actually going to seed this weekend cucumbers in that area, because I think so far the weather pattern this year here has been the oven didn't turn on. Like we've had a couple oven days, but the oven didn't actually turn on. Spags, welcome to the show. And so it's been cooler in general, and my peas have lasted longer. I got broccoli. I got cabbage. I just harvested my first cabbage yesterday. It's my first time ever successfully getting heads of cabbage. And it's the first cabbage of the year, but it's also my first successful cabbage. Usually the cabbage worms get them. What I did differently this year is I sprayed them with wood vinegar mixed with water when I saw some cabbage worm damage, and it all went away. Now, that also keeps your pollinators from landing. So if you have flowering things like that need to be pollinated, like your squash, you can spray them before flowers come, but after flowers come, you don't want to do it. Yes, it's Nicole Sauce LFTN on TikTok, by the way. Thank you, Justin, for putting that up there. So we got the broccoli, 2 rounds of it. I'm going to underplant seeds for cucumbers for my second planting of cucumbers, because I figure by the time the broccoli and the cabbage and the Brussels sprouts are all done, those little plants will be ready to be big plants, and we'll have a succession in the garden. The tomato wall is about 1 foot from the top of my windows on the house, and I use that both to grow tomatoes, and I use it to shade my house from southern sun exposure, which then makes it so I don't have to use air conditioning as much, because it doesn't heat up the wall, and the plants take that sun energy and photosynthesize it and turn it into salsa and sauce and slicing tomatoes. So I was so behind on the tomato wall, I was worried I wouldn't catch up. And here's been my experience with tomatoes is I put them in and I get them in early, and they end up about this big by about now. And this year I waited till late, and they were little when I put them out there, and they caught up. So I don't know what that means. I mean, eventually if you put tomatoes in super late, I guess that's a bad thing. I am going to take some cuttings off of these and root them starting in mid-July for hopefully a later round of tomatoes outside in the soil. I have some volunteer tomatoes in the soil that I'm letting grow in my upper garden. Plus, I put one row of tomatoes up there too. They're doing great. I don't have blight yet. This is unusual, especially when it's as rainy as it's been. But I did put aspirin in the ground with them. It's time to do another round of aspirin. I have aspirin in the hydroponic system too, and that appears to be working this year. Combine that with I'm much better at keeping plants happy, nutritionally speaking, with the rabbit poop and other amendments. I don't know if it's that I made the plants stronger or it's the aspirin, but I think the aspirin are helping. So I'm going to keep doing the aspirin trick. The green beans are tiny and about 1.5 inches long, my first row of those. And I have planted the second row that are up. They're not looking that great, but we'll see how they do. This first row is like bigger than I've ever had bush beans get. And then I have pole beans up on a trellis behind them. I am doing a harvest of my garlic probably this weekend or into early next week. And where the garlic was, I will put the third planting of green beans. I might actually put some more cucumbers there because I think it might be a good year for cucumbers. My beets are crap, though. So I'm a little sad about that. I might do a beet-specific bed and plant them late and try to see if I can get a decent, like 20 or 30 beets would be nice for me this year so I can can them. And right now I have like 15 beets that have made it. I've planted them twice. So I don't know why I'm having so much trouble with them this year, but sometimes that happens. Tactical has peppers that are about 1 foot tall, and he's pulling the flowers off to keep them growing bigger plants. My peppers are about 8 inches tall, and they are the Spirko jalapeno, and that is the only variety of pepper I've grown this year on purpose because I'm collecting seeds from it. I don't want it cross-pollinating with other peppers. Tacticals are far away, and he's doing bell peppers and all sorts of other stuff. I'm just doing Spirko peppers, and they're out in the garden now, and we will see how they do. Lettuce is done. I have one more head of lettuce in the upper garden, but it's starting to taste a little bitter, and that's just because that happens at this time of year, and we can just see how that goes. And Tactical's redoing his garden. He has a garden that he built into the side of the hill near his cabin, and he built it in a way where he's like, it's hard for me, a tall person with long arms, to reach the middle. So he's changing how the paths work. And that's a really important, if you would have taken the gardening, like first year gardening success course, we talked a lot about access, because if you build your garden in such a way that you have to climb over your plants to get to your plants, which can happen on accident with squash, it's very easy to do that with squash, then you don't maintain it and then you don't have as much success. So he's basically living that this year. He built it to where he does not have access to the center of his bed without adding access paths. So he's doing that. And then, as I said, the beets look really sad this year. I have a question. Add more aspirin dust about a month later. I don't add dust. What I do is I put 2 aspirin at the base of each plant when I transplanted them out. And then once a month, I'm doing that on a cycle. If you haven't done it yet, I would totally just try it this year, Tennessee permaculture. It worked for me last year, but then most farmers didn't get blight last year. And it appears to be working well this year. So we will see. I will keep assessing the situation, and I save all my own seeds. So that's part of the process as well. Next up, we have holler neighbors and community. So pretty much processing weekend is a communal event. The neighbors are coming over to help. They go home with some birds, and I usually put all the other birds in my freezer, and Nighthawk can access them. But that's because like half his freezer was full of my stuff until recently. He still has one freezer with my crap in it. I need to get out. It's the bacon. So that's happening. They're coming over to help set up tonight. If we are all set up when they get here, we will do 10 birds, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, get them packaged up and into the freezer fridge combo. Nighthawk gets to do all the errands tonight on his way home from work, which includes getting 100 pounds of ice for the process. And that's because I don't have an ice maker here, nor did I feel like making 100 pounds of ice. So we'll have that in the ice cream freezer, which I've just remembered I better plug in so it's actually cold when he gets here with the ice. And the other thing about our community is a lot of you have been helping me promote Self-Reliance Festival and my webinar series at NicoleSauce.com, which is still for sale, by the way. And all of the stuff we're doing here, as well as my shows in the last couple weeks, because you noticed I wasn't. And I wasn't because I was busy running around to funerals and things. So I just want to thank you for helping me keep getting the word out about the show. And I mean, it means a lot to me that you guys care enough to see something like that and just take action. So I wanted to say thank you for that. Next segment is infrastructure. We are working on the final fencing strategy for Hollow Roost. I have no idea how we're splitting the pasture. I'm actually pretty confused about it. But we have it so the birds can go out, and we need to make a decision about how we divide the pasture. And Tactical isn't quite sure how that's supposed to work. So I think we need to have a talk with Steve about what he was thinking about so that we can get that done all the way. Because right now I have temporary fencing pulled, and occasionally one of those little birds get out. In fact, yesterday I was up under Taj Mahal and talking to Nighthawk. And he goes, "You're not supposed to be there." I'm like, "Who isn't supposed to be there?" He's like, "I see a small white chicken." And I was like, "Yeah, we do not want chickens free ranging in my food forest and ripping up all my herbs and eating them and eating the strawberry plants. So you are correct. We do not want you up here." And we chased it back down the hill, and Nighthawk caught it and threw it over the fence. But we're pretty sure it pushed under that temporary fencing that we have. So that's happening. The rock wall behind my house it's always been really, really, really nice to have there, but there's a lot of weeds growing on it, and there's a gap between the soil and the rock that we never filled back in from placing the rocks. So Tactical's been working hard on filling that gap, and then we're going to plant things up along it that, like mint and things that discourage the growth of other really tall weeds, so that it's easier to maintain. And that's been a lot of, like, every time I see him, he's exhausted. And I'm like, "Why are you exhausted?" "Because I'm moving rocks." I'm like, "Well, do you want to stop moving rocks, maybe?" And he's like, "Nope, I want to get this done." I'm like, "Fair enough." So that's looking pretty good. And then we are going to replace the pump in the spring, because I have a spring that pumps into a cistern, and then the cistern pumps to the houses. So we're replacing the first pump in the system because its electrical cord is brittle and cracking, and eventually water is going to get to that. So we wanted to replace that before that happens, and then we can research the how and what of potentially replacing that electrical cord, and then we'll have a backup pump, because the pump itself is fine. So that's kind of been in the works for a few weeks, and I think after chicken processing, there's time to mess with it. Next segment is finances. Really, where we have been focusing this year is how can we reduce the need for external feed costs without me going to restaurants to source waste, because I don't want to do that. Now, I may actually reach out to the restaurant that is a mile away from here and see if I can bring them buckets and cycle buckets through if they're into that for their waste. And I'll feed that to the chickens if I do. But mostly I want to get systems here that are producing food, but I don't want to grow fields of corn. That's not part of our plan on my hilly 3.2 acre homestead. Nor is it the plan on the property next door that's 16 acres where we are running sheep. So what we've done is two things. We have set up the Hollow Roost situation, which Steve Eversole built, and it's beautiful, and he's going to have plans available for sale. And we have like a compost yard for the birds to work in. And that means that all of the food scraps the humans don't eat can go down there and get processed by the birds, thus reducing the feed. And just letting your birds outside and eating grass and bugs at this time of year reduces your need for feed. The system of fodder trees is helping us reduce the need for feed and external hay. And from there, we will see how we do. And if I do want to grow barley or some other crops, I don't know. But starting there, the third thing we're doing is growing rabbits so that the dogs have raw food. The rabbits' feed, though, because they're not in tractors, is higher than it needs to be. So something I'm starting to think about is how can I tractor these rabbits? Because I thought like Tactical was originally building tractors and he just stopped because it was too much. So this is a time when there are two people on the homestead. I need to probably get involved and start working on the strategy of how we tractor them without it being a nightmare of keeping them in water. So that's where the finances are this week. We haven't gotten to where we are starting to sell eggs yet because we don't have them. Kentucky Sustainable Living says, check out the Salvation Army. Most of the restaurants around here donate to them. I cut the middlemen out by going them. Here's the deal, dude. If I'm going to drive to the Salvation Army, the closest one to me is a 40 to 45 mile drive. And the reason I haven't sourced from restaurants in the area is it's a 25-mile drive each way. That's 50 miles, except for this one right over here. And I'm just not willing to do it. Like, I can do so much more in a day if I don't spend a couple hours driving for feed every week. And so that's why I haven't done that. But like, because that's like the chicken tractor on steroids method, right? Is you source stuff from restaurants. But if you're not out and about to where you can get them, unless you have somebody who can bring it to you, I don't want to invest that time, the gasoline and all of that stuff costs money too. And every hour I'm not here working on the homestead or working on my business costs money. That's why I often get a speaker fee when I'm out speaking, is that's like a whole day of I didn't make coffee. And I love speaking, but I also love being able to pay my mortgage. So anyway, that's the word from the Holler Homestead today. And we've had a really good time. We are starting to put out a little bit more content video wise, very cautiously. So I'm not going to promise it on a schedule, but I'm starting to work out the kinks in how I can broadcast from the kitchen and from the garden. Oxy is here. So she followed me through the garden yesterday. That's the video we put out on TikTok. I put it out on double speed because nobody wants to see me walk slowly. And where I'm at right now is with the last 2 weeks of personal drama happening. I have not been in my garden every day. And that means I haven't been weeding every day or every other day. And the perilla in particular, the weed I fight with the most, which is in the mint family, it is edible. And it was 4 days ago, it was an inch tall, and right now it's 10 inches tall. That's what I'm dealing with. And then it spreads, and it's very hard to get rid of. So it's the one I pull every time. So what I need to do is get out into my gardens and start pulling that. And I have I'm using wood chip mulch, so it's coming through that. I need to get out there, pull the perilla plants and put them very carefully before they go to seed. Because if they go to seed, then it's a whole nother wave of perilla plants. And put it into my basket and bring it to the compost pile I have up just for the weeds in the garden. I'm actually putting it in an area that's pretty stony under the hope it will soil itself and make that area a little bit flatter so I don't sprain my ankle when I try. We put the hose spigot in the garden where it's really hard for me to get to, and it's really irritating to me that it's there. But it's the hose spigot I have to deal with. And there's a freaking poison ivy vine right by it. So I don't know what I'm going to do about that, but I'm going to do something about it. Anyway, but it's also rocky and ankle breaking to get from the garden to the hose spigot to turn it on and off. Luckily, I don't need the hose spigot very much. We have 2 watering systems in the garden. I like to call them sprinklers. That's right. I use sprinklers right now that get the 2 zones of the garden. We have them on a timer up there. And so at this time of year, I don't need it. It's just when I put transplants in or seedlings in that I want to overspray shallow just for the germination phase of things, unless God is kind enough to rain on me every day on a cycle and then let the sun come out, which does happen in the spring in Tennessee. It's super nice. So Faith says, so I shouldn't plant shiso in the ground. I don't know what shiso is. Yeah. And then 30-day reviews is talking about bindleweed. I think bindweed, not bramble. There are some yucky weeds that get your stuff, but really perilla is the bane of my existence in the garden, and has been the entire time. It's all over the place. So even when you eliminate it from an area, eventually a bird poops a seed and you have more perilla. Not to mention if any part of the perilla is left behind, it comes. And, you know, the cool thing about perilla, as with any mint, is when it's little, it just comes really easily out. It doesn't mess up the soil. So, you know, it's not terrible. It's just if I don't keep up on it for 2 weeks, I now have a situation out there. And if I don't deal with the situation out there before I go out of town again, I'm going to have a failed garden, and that's not good. So, yeah, I can't control my bindweed, and it chokes everything. Fancy name is shiso. Perilla is the word for weed. Oh, okay. Yeah, because it's an edible thing. I didn't know that, Faith. I knew that it was like a culinary herb used in some Asian cooking, and I have used it that way. So, and the funny thing is, it's like, I never at this time of year have to worry about like, where am I going to get the perilla for the recipe? It's like, just go outside and look around and there's perilla, right? So, but it isn't, you know, like the lucky thing is it's an edible. We had somebody today on our Telegram group who found a poison hemlock in their garden, and they were pretty upset about it, which I can understand because you don't want to accident. Like, a lot of people think you can go to the garden and just eat stuff out of the garden, but if you have a weed like poison hemlock in there, that actually could end your life. It takes about 5 poison hemlock leaves to kill you, and they kill all mammals. So you don't want anybody eating it. Guys, we have poison hemlock growing where the sheep graze. And I'm like, hey, let's get those out of there. Tactical's like, yeah. The sheep don't eat it. The only reason our sheep would eat those was if we didn't have anything out. So that situation is one where I think there's a lot of fear put into people over poison hemlock because the powers that be, like your extension office, does not want you accidentally eating poison hemlock because then you die, and that's not really nice. So they've made people very afraid of it. And if you weed poison hemlock with your bare skin and you have a sensitivity to it, you can get a rash. They say that you can absorb enough of that fluid to poison yourself. That would take a lot, probably, but I don't know because I've never gotten to that phase. But I can tell you this: before I knew what poison hemlock was, I was pulling it out as weeds in the Holler Homestead without any protection. And sometimes I got rashes on my arms that I didn't know what it was. And it was probably from that. Do not recommend. If you see poison hemlock in your garden, get it out. And get it out in a way that does not squeeze its juices all over everything, if at all possible. Make sure you're wearing gloves and arm protection. Be ready to wash that. But it is not a reason to like freak out and take your whole garden out because it might be poisoned by the poison hemlock. If you're really worried about like the soil, right, that touched the roots, you can take that soil out too. But the deal is don't eat any of it. If you find it like up intertwined with your leafy greens, then just I would take the whole thing out and not try to save the leafy greens. But if there's a tomato plant in the same bed that's growing, I would still eat those tomatoes. You definitely want to get on it if you find poison hemlock on getting it out of there. Now, there's nothing I can do about the poison hemlock here, just kind of like the perilla. I can keep it out of my garden, and I haven't had poison hemlock in my garden in at least 5 years, but I used to get it too there. Once I cleared that area of poison hemlock, I didn't get more from seeds or from birds as much, although it still could happen. So knowing how to identify the poison hemlock is a good skill to have. But it comes up all up and down the roads and in the woods, and we do our best with it. It's a part of life. And if I ever need to poison myself, I know how to do it. Oh, wait, that's a weird macabre thought, isn't it? But it's not the end of the world. You just don't want to get the juices on you. You don't want to eat the juices. And when you eliminate the plant, I would just that's one I'm not going to compost. That's one that goes to the dumpster, basically. I will actually throw it away. I'm not going to burn it. If you don't have those options, I would probably, I don't know what I'd do. I'd probably bury it and watch that area to make sure it doesn't grow from there. But I don't want animals accidentally eating it either. And I don't want to accidentally eat it. We are fortunate that we can send it in a bag to the dumpster if we need to get rid of it. Or you can put it in a pile somewhere to compost that's way off your property or at the far end of your property, and it will, return to the earth. Is it worth having a far area in the garden for poisonous plants? I know some have a good reason to have. My thing about poisonous plants, some poisonous plants are also have herbal uses, but like foxglove can be helpful to help some people with heart conditions in small amounts. I'm not a doctor and I'm not recommending that. So if you were going to grow something for an herbal reason, I would probably have a separate area for that, because what will happen is they'll start coming up in your garden and then you got to deal with it, right? So I wouldn't have it anywhere near my garden, just like I wouldn't put Jerusalem artichokes in my garden for the reason I learned the hard way. They will take over your whole flip. I still have Jerusalem artichokes coming up in my garden 13 years later. And I've tried to and I've moved them at this point. There's another part of the yard where they grow. But the ones like so, I'm not sure I would mess with that. Here, Tactical, have this yummy hemlock tea. Yeah, that's a funny one. Anyway, so that's my thoughts on poison hemlock. There's a lot of things on the internet where people freak out. And then when you talk to the extension office, they're like, here's what you do with poison hemlock. And by the way, we have it everywhere, which is true in our area. Other areas you may not, but yeah, just don't eat it. And if it's up in your stuff, really mixed in, don't eat the stuff it's mixed in with, because you might accidentally eat some and you wouldn't want to do that. So anyway, that's just my thoughts on that whole situation. And poison hemlock and Queen Anne's lace are often mistaken for each other. The stalks of the poison hemlock look very different. The flowers look very different when you see them side by side. I also don't eat Queen Anne's lace, though. I just put it in flower bouquet. But we have, and they're like blooming at the same time. And then elderflower has lots of little white flowers, which could be mistaken for it too. Also, like, it has totally different kinds of leaves. But when people start getting into identifying plants, sometimes things look alike until you see those differences. So if you're not sure about anything that's growing wild or what it is, definitely check with your friends. Check with people who are confident in identifying plants if you're not sure. The thing with the poison hemlock is it has feathery leaves like a carrot. And so if it gets in your garden, that's why it's scary. But it is very clearly not a carrot when you pick it. So that's the way, that's the way to know. But if you have a very robust big carrot with feathery leaves that are thicker feathery and have purple spots on the stalks, that's probably poison hemlock. And you want to get that out of there. And it also won't have a carrot. It does have tap roots, but it's very clearly not a carrot. Anyway, those are all my thoughts today, guys. Thanks so much for joining the Homestead Happening live stream for the day. If you like the show and want to support the work I'm doing it here, you can do it in a couple ways. One, get your coffee at hollerroast.com. Two, consider becoming a member. Head over to livingfreeintennessee.com to find out more. With that, go out. Make it a great week.